In a small town where the streets smelled of bread after sunrise and rain after sunset, a kind shoemaker and his wife lived in a narrow house right behind their workshop. The shoemaker was an honest and skilled craftsman, but bad luck had been his constant companion for months. The price of leather went up, his customers were slow to pay, and the coins in their little jar dwindled each week. Still, he polished every shoe to a perfect shine, kept his tools sharp, and greeted everyone with a smile, even if it was a tired one. One evening, after counting the very last of their coins, he let out a heavy sigh. "We can only afford enough leather for one more pair of shoes," he said, his voice low. His wife gently squeezed his hand, her touch a small comfort in the quiet room. "Then we will make the best pair you have ever made," she whispered, her voice full of a hope he couldn't quite feel himself. So, the shoemaker lit a candle. He chose the smoothest, most supple piece of leather he owned and cut it with extreme care, measuring twice so not a single scrap would be wasted. He shaped the uppers, trimmed the soles, and laid all the pieces out on his workbench, ready for stitching in the morning. Before heading up to bed, he looked back at the silent, moonlit workshop and said, half joking, to the empty room, "If only a miracle could visit this place." The couple went to sleep that night, listening to the gentle tap of the wind on the window and the distant town clock, counting the lonely hours. At dawn, the shoemaker hurried downstairs, expecting to begin a long, arduous day of sewing, but he stopped, dead in the doorway, blinking, unable to believe what he was seeing. There, on his bench, stood a finished pair of shoes. They were perfectly stitched, perfectly balanced, polished to a gleam, and strong. It was as if they had been crafted by a master's invisible hands. The shoemaker picked them up, turning them over and over, checking every single seam, every knot, every tiny, graceful curve. "I did not do this," he murmured in complete astonishment. His wife, hearing his silence, ran into the workshop. Her eyes widened at the sight of the shoes. "Someone helped us," she said softly, as if speaking any louder might shatter the magic that hung in the air. They placed the remarkable shoes in the shop window, and before noon, a wealthy customer happened to walk by. He stopped, admired their perfect craftsmanship, and paid a very generous price for them, far more than they had hoped for. With that money, the shoemaker was able to buy enough leather for 2 more pairs of shoes. That evening, just as before, he carefully cut the pieces and left them on his workbench. This time, however, he arranged them neatly, hoping their mysterious helper wouldn't feel insulted by any chaos. And again, at dawn, the work was done. 2 pairs of shoes stood on the bench, even finer than the first, with stitches so neat they looked like a single, continuous thread of sunlight. Word began to spread through the town like wildfire. The shoemaker's shoes, people said, lasted longer, felt lighter, and fit better than any others you could find. Soon, customers were lining up outside his door. Farmers, merchants, people from all walks of life. The couple could finally afford warm soup for dinner, fresh candles to light their home, and enough leather to keep the workshop busy. But the mystery of it all tugged at them. "We should thank whoever is helping us," his wife said one evening. The shoemaker agreed, but a part of him was afraid of disturbing the magic, of scaring away their good fortune. For several nights, they tried watching from the top of the stairs, listening for the faintest footstep, but all they heard was the familiar sigh of the old house settling for the night. Finally, his wife had an idea. "Tonight," she said, her eyes shining with determination, "we hide in the workshop. We won't interrupt. We will only see." They pulled a heavy curtain across a dark corner, sat on the cold floor with the candle blown out, and waited, their hearts thumping a nervous rhythm against their ribs. At the stroke of midnight, the latch on the workshop door clicked softly, and 2 tiny elves slipped inside. They were no taller than a boot, dressed in simple, worn-out shirts, with bright, curious eyes and impossibly quick fingers. Without a single word, they hopped onto the bench, hummed a light, cheerful tune, and began to work faster than the wind. They threaded needles in a blink, pulled stitches perfectly tight, tapped soles into place with tiny hammers, stretched leather over the last, and shined it until it glowed in the moonlight. They moved like a pair of dancers, passing tools back and forth without ever missing a beat or dropping a thing. The shoemaker watched, filled with a sense of pure wonder. His wife, beside him, felt a sharp pinch of shame for their worn-out clothes. "They have been working for us all this time while we sleep," the shoemaker whispered, his voice thick with emotion. When the elves finished their work, they bowed to the new shoes as if they were proud of their craft, and then slipped out as quietly as they had arrived, leaving only the clean, familiar scent of leather behind. The next morning, their wife sighed, "They help us so much, but look at their thin clothes. They must be cold. Let's thank them properly." Together, they set to work making gifts. They sewed 2 tiny coats lined with the softest cloth, 2 warm little hats, and 2 small pairs of shoes, stitched with all the care and skill they possessed. That night, they placed the gifts on the bench right beside the cut leather pieces. Then, they hid behind the curtain once more. When the elves returned at midnight, they froze, their eyes falling on the little clothes. Then, their faces broke into wide, joyful smiles. They touched the soft coats, pulled on the warm hats, and slipped their feet into the tiny shoes, stomping happily on the bench as if testing the fit. Then, they danced in joyful circles, like little sparks from a fire, and before they left, they turned and bowed toward the curtain, as if they knew the grateful couple was watching all along. After that night, the elves never came back, but the shoemaker's good fortune remained. He worked with grateful hands, always remembering the gift he'd been given. He saved his money wisely, hired helpers, and paid them fairly, and always found time to mend shoes for neighbors who couldn't afford to pay. The whole town, in a way, learned the lesson of the shoemaker and his little helpers. That kindness invites kindness, and that honest work, when joined with gratitude, truly has the power to change a life. Thanks for watching.